My name is Harper Sinclair, and I'm 28 years old. I was sitting in my kitchen this morning when my phone buzzed with a text from Dad. "Sweetie, I know I bought you this house, but please don't come to Thanksgiving this year." My coffee mug slipped from my hands and shattered across the marble floor he'd paid for. The same man who'd written me a check for $400,000 just 6 months ago was now uninviting me from our family holiday. Something was terribly wrong. Before I dive into this unbelievable story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments below, hit that like button if you're ready for a wild ride, and don't forget to subscribe because trust me, you won't want to miss how this family drama unfolds. Now let me take you back to the beginning of this nightmare. 6 months ago, I was living my dream life in Denver. I had worked my way up to senior marketing director at Patterson and Associates, one of the most prestigious firms in Colorado. My Stanford MBA was finally paying off, and at 28, I had a perfect credit score, a healthy savings account, and what I thought was the most loving father in the world. Robert Sinclair, my dad, was a real estate mogul who built his empire from nothing. He started with a single property renovation when I was 5 and turned it into a multi-million-dollar development company. After my mother died from cancer when I was 22, he threw himself even deeper into work, but we remained incredibly close. I was his little girl, his pride and joy, the daughter who could do no wrong. That's why when he surprised me with the house, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. I remember that day so clearly. He called me on a Tuesday afternoon, his voice bubbling with excitement. "Honey, I found something I want to show you," he said. "Can you meet me at 1247 Oakwood Drive?" I had no idea what to expect, but when I pulled up to this stunning craftsman-style home with a wraparound porch and mature oak trees in the front yard, my jaw dropped. It was everything I'd ever dreamed of. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a gourmet kitchen, and a master suite with a walk-in closet bigger than my entire apartment. "Dad, whose house is this?" I asked as we walked through the front door. He handed me a set of keys with a red ribbon tied around them and said, "It's yours, sweetheart. Consider it an early inheritance." I burst into tears right there in the living room. He explained that he was so proud of everything I'd accomplished, and he wanted to give me this gift while he could enjoy watching me live in it. The down payment was $400,000, and he insisted on handling the entire mortgage too. "You've worked so hard, Harper. You deserve this," he said, wrapping me in one of his famous bear hugs. But everything changed 2 years ago when he married Diane. She was 45, a former nurse who'd lost her first husband in what she called a tragic accident. She came with 2 children, Madison, 25, who called herself a struggling artist but seemed to struggle more with holding down any job, and Kyle, 22, who dropped out of college and spent most of his time playing video games in my dad's basement. I tried to be welcoming. I really did. I wanted Dad to be happy after losing Mom, and Diane seemed to make him smile again. But I started noticing changes. Dad became more forgetful, more easily confused about financial details. He'd always been sharp as a tack with numbers, it was how he built his fortune, but suddenly he was asking me to help him remember things about his own business deals. Diane was always quick to step in and help him remember, which should have been my first red flag. She'd whisper in his ear during family dinners, finish his sentences, and speak for him when clients called the house. I mentioned my concerns to Dad once, but he brushed them off. "Diane's just looking out for me, honey. It's nice to have someone who cares." I was the responsible one in the family, the achiever who never caused drama. While Madison was constantly asking Dad for money to fund her latest art project and Kyle was racking up credit card debt that Dad mysteriously kept paying off, I was independent and successful. I thought that would protect me. I thought my track record of responsibility and my close relationship with Dad would shield me from whatever family politics were brewing. I was so incredibly naive. Looking back now, I can see that Diane was studying me from the moment she entered our family. She was taking notes on my routines, my relationships, my career, my finances. She was learning everything she needed to know to destroy me systematically. but at the time I just thought she was trying to be a good stepmother. When she asked questions about my job or my plans for the future, I thought she was showing genuine interest. When she commented on how expensive my car was or how nice my clothes were, I thought she was just making conversation. The morning I received that text, I must have read it 50 times, trying to make sense of it. "Sweetie, I know I bought you this house, but please don't come to Thanksgiving this year." The tone was so formal, so unlike my dad. He never called the house purchase a transaction between us. To him, it was a gift, an expression of love. And he would never uninvite me from Thanksgiving. We'd spent every Thanksgiving together since Mom died. It was our tradition, our sacred time together. I immediately called him, but it went straight to voicemail. I called again. Same thing. By the third call, my hands were shaking. I left a message, "Dad, it's me. I got your text, but I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Can you please call me back? I love you." The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time in my life, I felt truly afraid of what was happening to my family. I couldn't sit in that house another minute without answers. I grabbed my keys and drove straight to Dad's office, my heart pounding the entire 20-minute drive downtown. I'd been to Sinclair Development countless times over the years. I had my own key, a privilege Dad had given me when I turned 18 because he trusted me completely. I used to stop by after school and college, doing homework in the conference room while he finished meetings. The staff knew me, loved me, treated me like family. But when I walked in that Tuesday afternoon, something felt different. Dad's assistant, Mrs. Peterson, who'd been with the company for 15 years, was nowhere to be found. The receptionist, a young woman I didn't recognize, looked at me suspiciously when I walked past without checking in. I made my way to Dad's corner office, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Denver, and used my key to let myself in. That's when I found them. Dad was sitting behind his massive mahogany desk, looking older and more tired than I'd ever seen him, while Diane stood behind him with her hands on his shoulders in what looked like a possessive gesture rather than a supportive one. They both startled when I walked in, and the guilty expressions on their faces confirmed my worst fears. Something was very, very wrong. "Harper," Dad said, his voice higher pitched than usual. "What are you doing here?" Diane's grip on his shoulders visibly tightened, and she shot me a look that was pure ice despite her smile. "Hi, sweetie," she said in that syrupy voice she used whenever other people were around. "Your father and I were just discussing some family concerns." "What family concerns?" I asked, closing the door behind me and crossing my arms. "And what's this about me not coming to Thanksgiving?" Dad looked confused for a moment, as if he couldn't remember sending the text, but then Diane leaned down and whispered something in his ear. His expression hardened in a way I'd never seen before. "Harper, we need to talk about your behavior lately," Diane said, taking control of the conversation. "Your father has been very worried about some things that have come to light." She walked around to the front of the desk and opened a manila folder that I hadn't noticed before. "We've discovered some concerning financial activities that we need to discuss." My blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" I demanded, but Diane was already pulling out what looked like bank statements and printed emails. She spread them across Dad's desk like she was presenting evidence in a courtroom. The documents showed transactions I'd never made, emails requesting money that I'd never sent, and loan applications that bore my signature but weren't in my handwriting. "These emails," Diane said, pointing to a series of printouts, "show you requesting additional financial support from your father. $20,000 for a vacation to Europe, $15,000 for a new car, $50,000 for investment opportunities." She looked up at me with fake concern. "Robert has been so generous with the house, but these constant requests for money have been weighing on him heavily." I felt like I was in a nightmare. "I never sent those emails," I said, my voice cracking. "Dad, you know I would never ask you for money like that. I've been financially independent since college." But when I looked at him, I saw doubt in his eyes for the first time in my life. Diane had somehow convinced him that these fabricated documents were real. The bank statements, Dad said slowly, his voice sounding strained, show some very large transactions from accounts connected to my business. Transfers that I don't remember authorizing. He rubbed his temples as if he had a headache. I've been so forgetful lately. Diane has been helping me keep track of everything. That's when I understood what was happening. Someone had been forging my signature, creating fake emails from accounts that looked like mine but weren't, and generating false financial documents to make it appear that I was stealing from my own father. The sophistication of it was breathtaking and terrifying. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment scheme. This was planned, calculated, and designed to destroy my relationship with the most important person in my life. I want to see the original emails, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. I want to see the metadata, the IP addresses, everything. Diane's smile faltered for just a moment before she recovered. Of course, sweetheart. We want to get to the bottom of this too. But in the meantime, your father thinks it would be best if you took a step back from family events until we can sort this all out. Dad nodded slowly, still looking confused and tired. Maybe it would be better if you didn't come to Thanksgiving this year, Harper. Just until we can figure out what's been happening with these financial issues. The words hit me like physical blows. My own father, the man who'd raised me, loved me, supported me through everything, was choosing to believe forged documents over his own daughter. Dad, please, I whispered, tears starting to flow down my cheeks. You know me. You know I would never steal from you. Someone is trying to tear our family apart. But Diane was already ushering me toward the door, her grip on my arm firm and unforgiving. We'll call you when we've had time to review everything, she said. Until then, maybe it's best if you give Robert some space to process all of this. As I walked out of that office, I felt something break inside me that I wasn't sure could ever be repaired. The man who'd been my hero, my protector, my biggest supporter, had just chosen his wife of 2 years over the daughter he'd raised for 28 years. But as the shock began to wear off, it was replaced by something else, determination. Someone was playing a very dangerous game with my family, and I was going to find out who and why. The next morning, I arrived at work to find an email from HR requesting an immediate meeting. My stomach dropped as I walked into the sterile conference room where Margaret Collins, our head of human resources, sat with a folder that looked eerily similar to the one Diane had shown me the day before. Harper, we need to discuss some irregularities that have been brought to our attention regarding your expense reports, she said without any of her usual warmth. I sat down slowly, feeling like I was trapped in some twisted alternate reality. What kind of irregularities? I asked, though I already knew this was part of the same systematic attack that was destroying my family relationships. Margaret opened the folder and revealed a series of expense reports that bore my name and signature but documented purchases I'd never made. Luxury dinners at restaurants I'd never been to, hotel stays in cities I'd never visited, equipment purchases for personal use charged to company accounts. These reports total over $30,000 in questionable expenses over the past 6 months, Margaret continued. We received an anonymous tip about potential financial misconduct, and when we investigated, we found these discrepancies. The anonymous tipster had provided detailed documentation, timestamps, and even photographs of receipts. The level of preparation and forgery was beyond anything I could have imagined. My hand shook as I examined the documents. Someone had perfectly replicated my signature, created fake receipts from real businesses, and built an entire false narrative of financial misconduct. This is all fabricated, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Someone is trying to destroy my reputation and my career. But even as I said it, I could see the doubt in Margaret's eyes. The evidence was too comprehensive, too detailed to dismiss easily. We'll need to conduct a full investigation, she said, closing the folder. Until then, you're suspended with pay pending the outcome. I felt my entire world collapsing. In less than 24 hours, I'd been exiled from my family and suspended from my job. Someone was systematically dismantling every aspect of my life with surgical precision. That afternoon, my phone started buzzing with messages from confused friends and colleagues. I discovered that someone had been posting on social media accounts that looked exactly like mine but weren't under my control. The post showed pictures of expensive purchases, luxury vacations, and entitled rants about money and family obligations. The voice in these posts was nothing like mine, but they were sophisticated enough to fool people who didn't know me intimately. One post that particularly disgusted me read, "Some people just don't appreciate generosity. When daddy gives you a house, maybe be grateful instead of asking for more money all the time. Family is exhausting when they keep expecting handouts." Another showed a picture of an expensive handbag with the caption, "Retail therapy with daddy's credit card." Being the favorite daughter has its perks. These posts were designed to make me look like a spoiled, entitled brat who was taking advantage of my father's generosity. When I tried to report the fake accounts to the social media platforms, I discovered that whoever created them had access to enough personal information to pass verification checks. They had my phone number, email address, and enough biographical details to convince the platforms that these accounts were legitimate. My real accounts were being flagged as fake while the imposter accounts remained active. By evening, I started receiving cold responses from family friends when I tried to reach out for support. Mrs. Davidson, who'd been like a second mother to me since my mom died, was suddenly unavailable when I called. The Johnsons, who'd invited me to their daughter's wedding just last month, didn't return my messages. I later learned that they'd all received calls from someone claiming to be concerned about my recent behavior and my financial problems. Madison, my stepsister, had apparently been making the rounds at local cafes and shops, sharing concerned whispers about my gambling addiction and my desperate attempts to get money from Robert. She painted herself as the worried family member who just wanted to help but didn't know how. Kyle, meanwhile, had been spreading rumors at the bars near the university, telling anyone who'd listen about his crazy stepsister who was totally out of control with money. The most devastating blow came when my bank called to question several large transfers that had supposedly been made from my accounts. Transactions that I'd never authorized, moving money to offshore accounts that I'd never opened. My credit cards were suddenly maxed out with purchases I'd never made. My perfect credit score was being systematically destroyed by someone who had gained access to my financial identity. That night, I sat in the house my father had bought me, feeling more alone than I ever had in my life. Every light in the place was on because I was terrified of what might be lurking in the shadows. Someone had orchestrated the most sophisticated character assassination I could imagine, and they were executing it with military precision. They knew my routines, my relationships, my weaknesses, and they were exploiting every single one. I realized that whoever was behind this wasn't just trying to steal money or property. They were trying to erase me entirely, to make everyone who mattered in my life believe that I was someone completely different from who they'd always known me to be. The question that kept me awake all night was simple but terrifying: how long had they been planning this, and what was their ultimate goal? As I sat there in the darkness, clutching my phone and jumping at every small sound, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to be a victim. I was going to fight back, and I was going to find out exactly who was trying to destroy my life and why. I had no idea then just how deep this conspiracy went or how many lives had already been destroyed by the same people who were now targeting me. 3 days after my suspension from work, I was served with legal papers that made my blood run cold. A process server showed up at my front door at 7 in the morning, handing me a thick envelope with an apologetic shrug. Inside were documents claiming that my father had never intended to gift me the house, but rather had loaned me the down payment and expected monthly payments that I had failed to make. The loan agreement was 20 pages of legal jargon, complete with my forged signature on every page. According to these documents, I had agreed to pay Dad back $4,500 per month for the down payment, plus I was supposedly responsible for the mortgage payments myself. The papers showed that I was now 6 months behind on payments, totaling over $27,000 in missed payments, plus interest and penalties. What made it even more sinister was how legitimate everything looked. The documents were notarized by someone named Jennifer Walsh, dated 6 months ago, and filed with the county clerk's office. Someone had created an entire paper trail showing that the house purchase was a business transaction, not a family gift. They'd even included email exchanges between my father and me discussing the loan terms, emails that I never sent from accounts that weren't mine. I immediately called the notary's office listed on the documents, only to discover that Jennifer Walsh had died in a car accident just 2 weeks after supposedly notarizing my loan papers. When I asked about her records, her office told me they'd been destroyed in a break-in shortly after her death. Every lead was a dead end, every piece of evidence carefully cleaned up. That afternoon, I came home to find utility trucks in my driveway. The electricity, gas, and water were all being shut off due to non-payment by the property owner. When I showed the workers my bills and proof of payment, they showed me different bills, ones that claimed the utilities were in my father's name and that he'd requested termination of service. The addresses and account numbers matched, but the names and payment histories were completely different from my records. I spent 4 hours on the phone with utility companies, trying to prove that I lived here legally and had been paying my bills faithfully. Each company had received calls from someone claiming to be Harper Sinclair, requesting that service be terminated because his tenant had violated lease agreements. They had his social security number, his address, and enough personal information to convince the companies that the requests were legitimate. By evening, I was sitting in a cold, dark house with no power, no hot water, and no heat. I had to use my car to charge my phone and call hotels to find somewhere to stay. But when I tried to book a room, my credit cards were declined. Every single one of them. Someone had not only maxed them out but had also reported them as fraudulent, causing the companies to freeze all my accounts pending investigation. The next morning brought another devastating blow. I woke up in a cheap motel to find my neighbors had received official-looking letters on law firm letterhead, warning them about the unstable tenant living at my address. The letters, supposedly from my father's legal representation, explained that I had been evicted for non-payment and that I might become desperate or dangerous as I fought the eviction. Neighbors were advised to report any suspicious activity to local authorities immediately. Mrs. Henderson, who lived next door and had always been friendly, wouldn't even make eye contact when I tried to explain what was happening. The Patel family across the street actually crossed to the other side of the road when they saw me coming. In less than a week, I'd gone from being a welcome neighbor to being treated like a criminal in my own community. When I returned to the house that evening to collect more of my belongings, I discovered that someone had broken in. The front door was intact, but a window in the back had been smashed. Nothing of real value had been taken, but the house had been systematically searched. Drawers were pulled out, closets ransacked, and papers scattered everywhere. But the most terrifying discovery was what had been left behind: small baggies of white powder hidden in my bedroom and bathroom that definitely weren't mine. Before I could even process what I was seeing, police cars pulled up outside. Someone had called in a report of suspicious activity and possible drug trafficking at my address. Officers entered with a search warrant that was dated that very morning, suggesting someone had known exactly when to call in the tip and when the planted evidence would be discovered. The lead detective, a stern woman named Detective Morrison, was initially hostile and clearly expected to find a guilty drug dealer. But when she discovered the planted drugs, something in her expression changed. She'd been a cop for 20 years, she told me later, and she recognized a setup when she saw one. The drugs were too perfectly placed, too convenient, and my genuine shock and confusion were too authentic to fake. "Miss Sinclair," she said quietly as her team finished documenting the scene, "someone wants you to look very, very guilty of something. Question is, what did you do to make someone want to destroy you this thoroughly?" I broke down and told her everything: the forged documents, the fake social media accounts, the systematic isolation from family and friends, the financial identity theft. Detective Morrison exchanged glances with her partner, Detective Rodriguez. "We've seen cases like this before," Rodriguez said grimly. "Usually involves someone with access to personal information and enough resources to forge documents and bribe officials. This kind of operation takes months of planning and serious money. They agreed to investigate the break-in as more than just a simple burglary, and Detective Morrison gave me her card with instructions to document every strange incident, no matter how small. That night, as I sat in another motel room reviewing everything that had happened, I realized that someone had been planning my destruction for far longer than I'd initially thought. The level of detail, the sophistication of the document forgery, the systematic approach to isolating me from every support system, this wasn't the work of an amateur. Someone with significant resources and criminal experience was orchestrating my downfall, and they weren't planning to stop until I lost everything. I also realized something else that made my blood run cold. If they were willing to plant drugs and file false police reports, they were probably planning something even worse for me. I wasn't just being robbed or framed. I was being positioned as someone who might disappear, and no one would be surprised when it happened. The thought terrified me, but it also filled me with a determination I'd never felt before. Whatever they were planning, I was going to stop them first. The next morning, I did something I should have done weeks earlier. I hired a private investigator. Detective Morrison had quietly recommended Miranda Brooks, a former FBI agent who specialized in financial crimes and family fraud. Miranda's office was in a modest building downtown, but her credentials were impressive. She'd spent 15 years with the Bureau before going private, and her client testimonials spoke of solved cases that police had given up on. When I walked into her office and laid out everything that had happened, Miranda's expression grew increasingly grim. "Harper," she said after I'd finished explaining, "what you're describing isn't random crime. This is the work of someone who's done this before, probably multiple times. The level of sophistication suggests we're dealing with a professional con artist, possibly working with a network of accomplices." Miranda's first step was to investigate Diane's background, something I realized I should have insisted Dad do before he married her. What we discovered in the first 24 hours of investigation made my blood run cold. Diane Morrison, as she was known before marrying my father, had been married 3 times before. Her first husband, Thomas Brennan, had died in what authorities called a suspicious car accident just 2 years into their marriage, leaving her as the sole beneficiary of multiple life insurance policies worth over $1 million. The circumstances surrounding Thomas's death were disturbing. He'd been driving home from work on a road he'd traveled thousands of times when his car somehow went off the road and crashed into a ravine. The accident report noted that he had unusually high levels of prescription medication in his system, medications that his doctor had no record of prescribing. The investigation was closed after 6 months with no charges filed, but the lead detective had noted several irregularities that he wasn't able to pursue due to lack of evidence. Diane's second marriage, to a retired teacher named William Foster, lasted 3 years before William suffered what appeared to be a stroke that left him mentally incapacitated. Diane became his legal guardian and systematically drained his accounts before placing him in a state-run nursing facility. William died 6 months later under circumstances that raised questions but never resulted in charges. Again, Diane inherited everything. Her third husband, Dr. Marcus Webb, a successful cardiologist, had experienced a different fate. Instead of dying, he'd been systematically discredited in his professional and personal life through a campaign remarkably similar to what was happening to me. False accusations of prescription fraud, planted evidence, forged documents, all leading to the loss of his medical license, his savings, and eventually his sanity. Dr. Webb had attempted suicide twice before finally disappearing entirely. His body was never found, but he was declared dead after 7 years. Diane inherited his estate as well. "The pattern is always the same," Miranda explained, spreading photographs and documents across her desk. "Diane targets successful, wealthy men, usually those who've recently lost a spouse or gone through a difficult divorce. She presents herself as a caring, supportive partner while systematically isolating them from family and friends. Then she begins the financial manipulation phase." What made Diane's operations particularly sophisticated was that Madison and Kyle weren't just her children, they were her accomplices, trained from childhood to help execute elaborate cons. Madison's struggling artist persona was perfect cover for someone who needed flexible schedules and cash payments. Kyle's gaming addiction meant he spent countless hours online, developing skills in digital manipulation, identity theft, and social media fraud. Miranda had discovered that Madison actually held a degree in graphic design from a community college under a different name and had been arrested twice for check fraud before her records were mysteriously sealed. Kyle had been expelled from 3 different high schools for computer-related crimes, including hacking school systems and stealing personal information from students and faculty. "They're not just grifters," Miranda said. "They're a criminal organization that specializes in elder fraud and asset theft. Diane is the mastermind, Madison handles document forgery and social manipulation, and Kyle manages the digital crimes, fake accounts, identity theft, online harassment." But the most chilling discovery came when Miranda traced the network of lawyers and officials who'd helped legitimize Diane's various schemes. The same law firm had handled probate for all 3 of Diane's previous husbands. The same notary had witnessed key documents in each case, including Jennifer Walsh, who'd notarized my fake loan papers before her convenient death. The same private investigators had been hired to gather evidence of misconduct by family members who tried to challenge Diane's inheritance claims. "Harper, your father isn't Diane's mark," Miranda said, her voice heavy with implications. "You are. She married him to get close to you. Everything that's happened has been designed to isolate you, discredit you, and position you as someone who might believably disappear or commit suicide under the pressure of financial and legal troubles." The realization hit me like a physical blow. I hadn't been collateral damage in an attack on my father. I'd been the primary target all along. Diane had researched my family, learned about my close relationship with Dad and my successful career, and identified me as someone worth destroying. The house, the generous gifts, the loving stepmother act, it had all been preparation for this systematic annihilation of my life. Miranda showed me financial records indicating that someone had been monitoring my bank accounts, credit reports, and employment records for over a year before Diane even met my father. They'd known my salary, my spending habits, my social connections, and my routines long before the first family dinner where Diane had seemed so interested in getting to know me. "The question now," Miranda said, "is whether your father is an innocent victim who's being manipulated, or whether he's been turned into an accomplice through drugs, blackmail, or psychological manipulation." She'd arranged for discreet surveillance of Dad's house and office, and what they'd observed was deeply troubling. Dad appeared confused and disoriented much of the time, often seeming to forget conversations shortly after having them. He was being given pills by Diane multiple times per day, supposedly vitamins and supplements for his health. "We need to get him tested," Miranda said. "There are drugs that can cause memory loss, confusion, and personality changes while being virtually undetectable in standard medical exams. If Diane is drugging him, it would explain why he's been so different lately and why he believed those forged documents so easily." That night, as I sat in another anonymous motel room, I finally understood the full scope of what I was fighting. This wasn't just about money or property. Diane and her criminal children were planning to murder me, just like they'd probably murdered Thomas Brennan and Marcus Webb. They'd spent over a year positioning me as an unstable, desperate person who might believably take her own life when faced with financial ruin and family rejection. But now I knew the truth, and I had an ally who believed me. Miranda Brooks was going to help me expose this criminal conspiracy and save my father's life in the process. The fight was far from over, but for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I had a chance to win. Working with Miranda, I began the most intense investigation of my life. We started by documenting every single fraudulent document, every fake social media post, and every suspicious financial transaction. Miranda's contacts at the FBI were willing to help unofficially, particularly after she showed them the evidence of a potential pattern of elder abuse and fraud that crossed state lines. Agent Rosa Martinez from the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division met with us in Miranda's office 3 days later. Agent Martinez was a specialist in organized fraud schemes, and after reviewing our evidence, she confirmed our worst fears. "This is definitely the work of a criminal organization that's been operating for years," she said. "The level of sophistication, the fake identification documents, the bribery of officials, this isn't a family dispute. This is a federal crime spree." Our first breakthrough came when Miranda's surveillance team captured video footage of Kyle breaking into my house to plant the drugs. The footage was clear enough to see his face, and it showed him using lock picks to enter through the back door before strategically placing the evidence throughout my home. Even more damning, the video captured him making a phone call immediately after planting the drugs, the same call that had brought police to search my house just hours later. Agent Martinez was able to get warrants to tap the family's phones and monitor their digital communications based on this evidence of active criminal conspiracy. What we discovered was a treasure trove of incriminating information. Madison and Kyle had been texting about the Harper problem for months, discussing strategies for discrediting me and timelines for finishing the job. Diane had been communicating with contacts in other states about asset liquidation and cleanup protocols. The most disturbing discovery was a series of emails between Diane and someone identified only as Dr. K about medications that could cause cognitive impairment without showing up in standard blood tests. The emails discussed dosages, delivery methods, and expected timelines for complete cognitive compliance. It was clear that Dad had been drugged systematically for months to make him more susceptible to manipulation. Agent Martinez arranged for a specialized medical team to secretly test Dad's blood during one of his routine doctor's appointments. Dr. Sarah Chen, a toxicologist who worked with the FBI, was able to detect traces of several powerful psychoactive drugs that explained Dad's memory loss, confusion, and personality changes. The medications were sophisticated enough that a regular doctor would likely miss them, but Dr. Chen's specialized equipment revealed them clearly. "Your father has been systematically poisoned," Dr. Chen explained during a confidential meeting. "The drug combinations we found would cause severe short-term memory loss, impaired judgment, and increased suggestibility. Long-term exposure could cause permanent brain damage or death." The revelation that Diane had been slowly killing my father while stealing his assets filled me with rage unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Meanwhile, Miranda's investigation into Diane's past had uncovered even more victims than we'd originally discovered. She'd been operating under different names in different states for over 15 years, leaving a trail of suspicious deaths, disappearances, and financial destruction. We found 12 different identities she'd used, 7 confirmed victims, and evidence suggesting at least 3 other cases where wealthy men had died under suspicious circumstances shortly after marrying women matching Diane's description. Agent Martinez connected us with victim advocacy groups in 4 different states, and we discovered that Madison and Kyle had been accomplices in multiple operations. In California, Madison had posed as a college student to gain access to an elderly professor's finances. In Arizona, Kyle had worked as a computer technician to install monitoring software on a target's devices. They were experienced criminals who'd been operating as a family business for years. The FBI's forensic accountants traced money flowing through dozens of shell companies and offshore accounts. Diane's organization had stolen millions of dollars over the years, using sophisticated money laundering techniques to hide their proceeds. They'd purchased fake identification documents, bribed officials in multiple jurisdictions, and maintained safe houses where they could disappear if investigations got too close. "Harper, you stumbled into the middle of a major organized crime operation," Agent Martinez explained. "You were never just a victim of family drama. You were the target of professional criminals who specialize in asset theft and murder." The FBI was now treating this as a RICO case, a federal investigation into organized racketeering that could result in life sentences for everyone involved. Our surveillance revealed that Diane was planning to accelerate her timeline. She'd been discussing emergency protocols with her accomplices and making arrangements to liquidate assets quickly. Phone intercepts captured her telling Madison that the Harper situation needs to be resolved within the next 2 weeks, before the holidays. Agent Martinez interpreted this as planning for my murder, probably staged to look like a suicide brought on by financial and legal pressures. The most crucial evidence came when we managed to turn Jennifer Walsh's former assistant, Rebecca Taylor, who'd been present when my loan documents were supposedly notarized. Rebecca had been blackmailed into participating in the fraud scheme, but she agreed to testify in exchange for immunity. Her testimony revealed that Jennifer Walsh had been murdered specifically because she'd discovered the document forgery operation and threatened to expose it. Jennifer figured out that her notary stamp was being used to legitimize fake documents, Rebecca explained during a recorded interview with the FBI. She confronted Diane about it, demanding to know what was really going on. 2 days later, she was dead in that car accident. It wasn't an accident at all. With Rebecca's testimony, the video evidence of Kyle planting drugs, the phone intercepts discussing murder plans, and the medical evidence that Dad was being poisoned, we finally had enough to move forward. But Agent Martinez insisted on one more crucial piece of evidence, catching them in the act of trying to harm either me or Dad. "We need to document an actual attempt at violence," she said. "Otherwise, good lawyers might be able to explain away the other evidence as circumstantial." The plan we developed was dangerous but necessary. I would attend Thanksgiving dinner at Dad's house, wearing recording equipment and with FBI surveillance teams positioned nearby. We would give Diane and her accomplices an opportunity to make their final move while documenting everything for prosecution. It was terrifying to think about walking into a house with people who'd already committed multiple murders, but it was the only way to save my father and ensure that these criminals couldn't destroy any more families. As Thanksgiving approached, I felt a mixture of terror and anticipation. After months of being victimized by people I'd trusted, I was finally going to fight back with the full power of federal law enforcement behind me. Diane and her children had underestimated me completely. They'd seen me as just another victim to be manipulated and destroyed. They had no idea that their intended victim had become their worst nightmare, someone with the evidence and determination to bring their entire criminal empire crashing down. Thanksgiving morning arrived gray and cold, matching my mood perfectly. I sat in my car outside Dad's house at exactly 11:30 a.m., wearing a wire that Agent Martinez had personally fitted that morning. FBI surveillance teams were positioned in unmarked vehicles throughout the neighborhood, and Agent Martinez herself was monitoring everything from a van parked 2 blocks away. My hands were shaking as I checked the recording equipment one final time, knowing that the next few hours would determine whether I saved my father's life or walked into a trap that would destroy us both. The house looked exactly the same as it had during happier times, with autumn decorations on the porch and the warm glow of lights visible through the windows. For a moment, I allowed myself to remember what Thanksgiving used to feel like. The smell of turkey and stuffing, Dad's terrible jokes, the comfortable chaos of family tradition. But those memories were shattered the moment Diane opened the front door. "Harper," she exclaimed, her voice dripping with fake surprise and syrupy sweetness. "What a wonderful surprise. We weren't expecting you." Her performance was flawless, the perfect picture of a delighted stepmother welcoming an unexpected family member. But I could see the cold calculation in her eyes, the quick assessment of this unexpected development in her carefully planned scenario. "I decided I couldn't miss Thanksgiving with my family," I said, stepping into the foyer and immediately noticing how different Dad's house felt. The warm, welcoming atmosphere I remembered had been replaced by something sterile and oppressive. Family photos that had included me for decades were now conspicuously absent, replaced by pictures of Diane's children and formal portraits that looked more like a real estate staging than a family home. Dad appeared in the doorway to the living room, and my heart broke at how frail and confused he looked. He'd lost at least 15 pounds since I'd seen him last, his skin had a grayish pallor, and his eyes had a vacant quality that spoke of serious cognitive impairment. "Harper?" he said uncertainly, as if he wasn't sure I was really there. "I thought, didn't we decide you weren't coming this year?" "There's been a misunderstanding, Dad," I said gently, walking over to hug him. He felt fragile in my arms, and I could smell the chemical scent of whatever medications Diane had been giving him. "I wanted to be here with you for Thanksgiving. We need to talk about some important things." Madison appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron and wearing an expression of poorly concealed irritation. "Harper." "What a surprise," she said, echoing her mother's fake enthusiasm. "We were just about to sit down for dinner. I'm not sure we have enough food for an extra person." Kyle emerged from the basement, looking startled and nervous, constantly glancing toward his mother for cues on how to handle this unexpected situation. "That's okay," I said, settling into my usual spot at the dining room table. "I'm just here to spend time with family. Maybe we can talk about some of the things that have been happening lately." The tension in the room was palpable. Diane, Madison, and Kyle all exchanged meaningful glances while Dad continued to look confused and disoriented. Dinner began with forced small talk, but the undercurrent of hostility was unmistakable. Diane kept steering the conversation toward my recent difficulties, making pointed comments about financial responsibility and family loyalty. "Robert has been so worried about you, sweetheart," she said, passing the cranberry sauce with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "All these legal troubles and money problems. It's been very stressful for him." "What legal troubles?" Dad asked, looking genuinely confused. It was clear that his short-term memory was severely compromised, and he couldn't remember the false accusations that had been presented to him just days earlier. Diane quickly intervened, speaking in the patient tone someone might use with a child. "Remember, honey, we talked about Harper's financial situation. The problems with her house payments, the issues at her work." She was clearly hoping to refresh the false narrative in his drugged mind, but Dad just looked more confused. "I don't remember," he admitted, rubbing his temples. "I feel like I can't remember anything clearly lately. That's when I decided to spring my trap." "Dad, do you remember buying me the house?" I asked directly. "Do you remember telling me it was a gift?" His face brightened momentarily, and for a second I saw a glimpse of the father I remembered. "Of course I remember," he said with more certainty than he'd shown all day. "I wanted to give you something while I could enjoy watching you love it. You worked so hard, Harper. You deserved that house." Diane's expression darkened dangerously as she realized Dad's true memories were surfacing despite the drugs. "Robert, you're confused," Diane said firmly. "Remember, we discussed this. It was a loan, not a gift. Harper was supposed to make monthly payments." But Dad shook his head stubbornly. "No, that's not right. I would never make Harper pay me back for a gift." "I'm not confused about that." His voice was getting stronger, more like the father I remembered. The confrontation between his drugged confusion and his deep memories was creating cracks in Diane's control. Madison jumped in to support her mother. "Uncle Robert, you showed us the loan papers. Harper signed them agreeing to pay you back." But Dad was becoming agitated, sensing that something was very wrong even through his chemically induced fog. "I never asked Harper to sign loan papers," he said, his voice rising. "Someone is lying to me. Someone is trying to make me forget things." His growing clarity was clearly terrifying to Diane and her children, who realized their carefully maintained control was slipping away. That's when Kyle made his fatal mistake. "Maybe we should give you your medication, Mr. Sinclair," he said, reaching for a pill bottle on the sideboard. "It helps with your memory problems." The casual way he revealed his knowledge of Dad's medication schedule, and the fact that he had access to the pills, was exactly the evidence Agent Martinez needed. "What medication?" I asked sharply. "Dad, what pills have they been giving you?" Dad looked confused again, and I could see him struggling to remember through the chemical haze in his brain. "Diane gives me vitamins," he said uncertainly. "For my health. She takes good care of me." But there was doubt in his voice now, a growing awareness that something wasn't right about his situation. Diane's mask was finally beginning to slip. "Harper, you're upsetting your father," she said, her voice carrying a threatening edge for the first time. "Maybe you should leave before you cause more family drama." The polite pretense was cracking, revealing the cold predator underneath. "I'm not going anywhere," I said firmly. Dad, I need you to listen to me carefully. These people have been drugging you, stealing your money, and trying to destroy our family. That medication Kyle just mentioned isn't vitamins. It's designed to make you confused and forgetful so they can manipulate you. The explosion of anger from Diane was immediate and terrifying. How dare you come into our home and make these ridiculous accusations, she screamed, abandoning all pretense of civility. You're just a spoiled brat who can't accept that your father chose a new family over his selfish, entitled daughter. Madison and Kyle flanked their mother, their own masks dropping to reveal the criminals underneath. She's been nothing but trouble since day one, Madison snarled. Always thinking she was better than us, always acting like she deserved more than everyone else. You have no idea what we've sacrificed to take care of Robert, Kyle added, his voice full of venom. While you were off playing career woman, we were here every day, dealing with his problems, managing his life. But it was Diane's next words that sealed her fate and provided the FBI with exactly the confession they needed. You think you're so smart, Harper, but you have no idea what's really been happening. Your precious daddy has been signing papers and making decisions for months that he'll never remember. By the time we're finished, there won't be anything left of his estate, and there won't be any witnesses to tell a different story. The threat was unmistakable, captured clearly by my recording equipment and transmitted live to the FBI surveillance team. Agent Martinez later told me that those words were the moment they knew they had an airtight case for conspiracy to commit murder, elder abuse, and organized fraud. Dad had been listening to this entire exchange with growing horror and clarity. Whatever drugs they'd been giving him weren't strong enough to completely suppress his intelligence and survival instincts. You've been poisoning me, he said, his voice filled with dawning realization and rage. You've been stealing from me and trying to turn me against my daughter. The confrontation reached its peak when Diane produced a bottle of pills from her purse and tried to force Dad to take them. You need your medication, Robert, she said, her voice now openly threatening. You're getting agitated and confused again. But when she tried to grab him, Dad knocked the pills out of her hand, sending them scattering across the dining room floor. That's when Kyle lunged at me, apparently deciding that physical violence was the only way to regain control of the situation. But he never made contact because Agent Martinez and her team burst through the front door at exactly that moment, weapons drawn and federal badges clearly visible. FBI. Nobody move. Agent Martinez shouted as FBI agents surrounded the dining room. Diane, Madison, and Kyle were on the ground in handcuffs within seconds, while paramedics who'd been standing by rushed in to check on Dad's condition. As I watched Diane being read her rights, her face twisted with rage and hatred as she realized her entire scheme had collapsed. You have no idea what you've done, she hissed at me. We've been planning this for years. You should have just disappeared quietly when we gave you the chance. Even in defeat, she was confessing to conspiracy and threatening my life, providing Agent Martinez with even more evidence for the prosecution. Madison and Kyle were equally unrepentant, cursing and making threats even as they were being arrested for multiple felonies. The most satisfying moment came when Dad, now free from immediate danger and beginning to think more clearly as the drugs left his system, looked directly at Diane and said, I trusted you with my life, and you tried to steal everything I've worked for and destroy my relationship with my daughter. I will spend the rest of my life making sure you pay for what you've done to my family. As the FBI agents led Diane and her children away in handcuffs, I finally felt safe for the first time in months. The nightmare was over, the criminals were caught, and my father was going to recover. But the journey back to normal life was just beginning, and there was still a long road ahead for both of us to heal from the trauma of what we'd endured. The next few weeks passed in a blur of medical appointments, legal proceedings, and emotional recovery that tested both Dad and me in ways we never could have imagined. Dad was immediately hospitalized for detoxification and comprehensive medical evaluation. Dr. Sarah Chen, the toxicologist who'd been working with the FBI, oversaw his treatment as the powerful psychoactive drugs slowly left his system and his cognitive function began to return. The medical recovery was both encouraging and heartbreaking to watch. Each day, Dad became more like himself, but he also became more aware of how thoroughly he'd been manipulated and how much damage had been done to our relationship. "Harper, I can't believe I doubted you," he said during one of my daily visits to his hospital room. "I can't believe I chose them over you. How do I ever make that right?" The guilt was eating him alive, but Dr. Chin explained that the drugs Diane had been giving him were specifically chosen to impair judgment and increase suggestibility. "Your father wasn't capable of making rational decisions," she assured us. "The medications he was given would have made it impossible for him to distinguish between real memories and planted suggestions. What happened wasn't his fault." The legal proceedings moved with surprising speed once Agent Martinez presented the mountain of evidence we'd collected. Diane was charged with elder abuse, conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, identity theft, money laundering, and racketeering under the RICO Act. Madison faced charges for document forgery, identity theft, and conspiracy. Cull was charged with breaking and entering, planting evidence, computer fraud, and conspiracy. Additional charges were being prepared related to the murders of Thomas Brennan and Jennifer Walsh. The evidence was overwhelming. Phone intercepts, video surveillance, financial records, medical tests, witness testimony, and recorded confessions created an airtight case that even the most expensive lawyers couldn't challenge effectively. Agent Martinez told me that federal prosecutors were confident about securing convictions on all major charges. The most satisfying development was watching their criminal network unravel as other victims came forward with their stories. Rebecca Taylor's testimony about Jennifer Walsh's murder opened up investigations in 3 other states. Dr. Marcus Webb, the cardiologist who'd allegedly disappeared, was found living under an assumed name in Oregon after suffering a complete nervous breakdown. He agreed to testify about how Diane had systematically destroyed his life and professional reputation. Family members of Thomas Brennan, Diane's first husband, finally had their suspicions validated when federal investigators reopened his case with new evidence. The car accident that killed him was now being investigated as homicide, with Diane as the primary suspect. The insurance companies that had paid out on his life insurance policies joined the federal case, seeking to recover the fraudulent payments they'd made. My professional life was completely vindicated as the FBI's investigation proved that every accusation against me had been fabricated. Patterson and Associates not only reinstated me but promoted me to vice president and gave me a substantial bonus for the extraordinary circumstances I'd endured. My colleagues were horrified to learn how sophisticated the character assassination campaign against me had been, and many apologized for doubting me during the darkest period of the ordeal. The financial recovery was complex but ultimately successful. Federal marshals seized all assets that Diane and her children had acquired through their criminal activities, including properties in multiple states, offshore bank accounts, and luxury items purchased with stolen money. Court-ordered restitution returned every penny that had been stolen from Dad, plus interest and damages. The house that had started this whole nightmare was officially transferred back to me with a clear title, free of any fake loan obligations. But more importantly, Dad and I spent hours there talking through everything that had happened and slowly rebuilding the trust that Diane's manipulation had damaged. "I want you to keep this house," he told me. "But now it represents something different. It represents your strength and your refusal to let criminals destroy our family." The most emotional moment came when we held a small memorial service for the real victims of Diane's crimes, Thomas Brennan, Jennifer Walsh, and the others whose lives had been stolen by this criminal organization. Dad spoke about the importance of honoring people who'd died because they'd trusted the wrong person, and we made commitments to support organizations that help victims of elder fraud and family manipulation. Dr. Webb's reunion with his surviving family members was particularly moving. His sister had spent years believing he'd abandoned them, not knowing that he'd been systematically destroyed and driven into hiding by Diane's criminal network. The FBI's investigation gave him back his identity and his family, though the trauma of what he'd endured would take years to fully heal. Agent Martinez kept us updated on the prosecution's progress, and the news was consistently encouraging. Diane's defense team tried to claim that she was the victim of her children's schemes, but the recorded conversations and financial evidence clearly showed that she was the mastermind of the entire operation. Her attempts to portray herself as a caring stepmother who'd been misunderstood fell apart when prosecutors played recordings of her discussing plans for my murder. Madison and Kyle both agreed to cooperate with federal prosecutors in exchange for reduced sentences, providing detailed testimony about their criminal organization's methods and victims. Their cooperation led to additional arrests of corrupt officials, lawyers, and notaries who'd been part of the network. The scope of the investigation expanded to include cases in 8 different states and millions of dollars in fraudulent activity. 6 months after that terrible Thanksgiving confrontation, we received the news we'd been waiting for. Diane was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Madison received 8 years for her cooperation in the prosecution. Kyle, who was still young and had provided extensive cooperation, received 5 years and was required to make full restitution to victims and perform community service. Dad and I attended the sentencing hearing, where we were finally able to give victim impact statements describing how Diane's crimes had affected our lives. "You didn't just steal money," I told the court while looking directly at Diane. "You tried to steal my father's mind, my reputation, my career, my family relationships, and ultimately my life. You turned the people I trusted most into weapons against me. But you failed, because love and truth are stronger than manipulation and lies." Dad's statement was even more powerful. "I trusted you with my life, my home, and my family," he said, his voice strong and clear. "You repaid that trust by poisoning me, stealing from me, and trying to turn me against my daughter. You are not a wife or a stepmother. You are a predator who destroys families for profit. I hope you spend every day of your prison sentence thinking about the lives you've ruined and the families you've destroyed." Diane showed no remorse, even at sentencing. She stared at us with cold hatred and whispered something to her lawyer that made him shake his head in disgust. Even facing decades in prison, she remained the same calculating predator who'd infiltrated our family and nearly destroyed our lives. But justice wasn't just about punishment. The FBI's investigation led to new federal legislation strengthening protections for elderly Americans against financial fraud and family manipulation. The Harper Sinclair Act requires additional verification procedures for large financial transactions involving seniors and creates federal penalties for anyone who drugs elderly people to facilitate theft or abuse. As we left the courthouse after sentencing, Dad took my hand and squeezed it tight. "We survived," he said simply. "They tried to destroy us, but we survived and we're stronger now." He was right. The criminal conspiracy that had torn our family apart had ultimately brought us closer together and taught us lessons about trust, resilience, and the importance of fighting for the people you love. The healing process was far from over, but we'd reclaimed our lives, our relationship, and our future from people who'd tried to steal everything that mattered to us. Most importantly, we prevented them from destroying other families the way they'd almost destroyed ours. 1 year later, I stood in the kitchen of the house that had almost cost me everything, preparing Thanksgiving dinner for a very different kind of family gathering. The marble countertops that had once been stained with coffee from that shocking text message now gleamed under warm lighting as I chopped vegetables and seasoned the turkey. Dad sat at the kitchen island, looking healthier and more vibrant than he had in years, telling stories and jokes while helping with the preparation. The cognitive damage from Diane's drugs had healed completely, leaving him sharper and more aware than ever. Our guest list for this Thanksgiving was small but meaningful. Detective Sarah Morrison and Agent Rosa Martinez joined us, along with Miranda Brooks, the private investigator who'd helped save our lives. Dr. Sarah Chin came with her husband and teenage daughter, grateful for the friendship that had grown from our shared commitment to justice. Rebecca Taylor, the former notary assistant whose testimony had been crucial to the prosecution, brought her children and her new sense of freedom from the fear that had controlled her for so long. Most significantly, Dr. Marcus Webb joined us with his sister and her family. Marcus had rebuilt his medical practice and was now working with federal agencies to train healthcare professionals to recognize signs of elder abuse and cognitive manipulation. His recovery had been slow and difficult, but his determination to help other victims had given him purpose and healing that traditional therapy alone couldn't provide. The conversation around our dinner table was unlike any Thanksgiving we'd experienced before. Instead of surface-level pleasantries, we talked openly about trauma, recovery, justice, and the ongoing work of healing from systematic betrayal. "You know what I've learned?" Dad said as we shared what we were grateful for. "I used to think gratitude was about the good things that happened to you. But real gratitude is about surviving the worst things and discovering you're stronger than you thought possible." My own journey over the past year had been transformative in ways I never could have anticipated. The consulting firm I'd started to help fraud victims had grown beyond my wildest expectations. We'd helped over 200 families recognize and escape various forms of financial manipulation, elder abuse, and family fraud schemes. The work was emotionally demanding but incredibly fulfilling, giving meaning to my own suffering by using it to protect others. One of our most successful cases involved a family in Phoenix where an adult son had been systematically stealing from his elderly mother while convincing other family members that his sister was the problem. The patterns were remarkably similar to what Diane had done to us: isolation, false accusations, forged documents, and systematic asset theft. But because we recognized the signs early, we were able to intervene before the situation escalated to violence or permanent damage. The Harper Sinclair Act had become a model for other states developing their own elder protection legislation. I'd testified before Congress about the sophisticated methods that criminal organizations use to exploit vulnerable seniors and their families. The legislative work had connected me with advocacy groups across the country, creating a network of survivors and professionals dedicated to preventing family-based financial crimes. But perhaps the most important development had been the healing of my relationship with Dad. The months of therapy, honest conversations, and shared commitment to helping other families had created a bond between us that was deeper and more authentic than anything we'd experienced before. We'd learned to talk about difficult topics, to question assumptions, and to maintain our connection even when facing external pressures. I used to be afraid that what happened with Diane meant I couldn't trust my own judgment about people, Dad admitted during one of our therapy sessions. But I've realized that the problem wasn't my judgment. The problem was that I didn't listen to my instincts when they were telling me something was wrong. I ignored red flags because I wanted to believe that someone could love me without ulterior motives. Dr. Patricia Williams, our family therapist, had helped us understand that Dad's vulnerability to Diane's manipulation wasn't a personal failure but rather a common response to grief, loneliness, and the natural human desire for companionship. Predators like Diane specifically target people who are grieving or isolated, she explained. They're skilled at identifying emotional vulnerabilities and exploiting them systematically. The therapy process had also helped me understand my own response to the crisis. For months, I'd blamed myself for not recognizing the danger earlier, for trusting people who turned out to be criminals, for not protecting Dad more effectively. But Dr. Williams helped me see that my response had actually been remarkably adaptive and intelligent. You recognized that something was wrong even when you couldn't identify exactly what it was, she pointed out. You sought help, gathered evidence, and fought back strategically. Your survival instincts and problem-solving abilities were what saved both you and your father. The financial aspects of our recovery had been surprisingly complex. While the court-ordered restitution had returned the money that was stolen, the emotional and psychological costs were much harder to quantify. Dad had lost confidence in his ability to manage his own affairs and make important decisions. I'd lost my sense of security in family relationships and had to rebuild my professional reputation from scratch. But working together on the consulting business had helped both of us regain confidence while creating something positive from our traumatic experience. The house itself had become a symbol of survival rather than victimization. We'd redecorated completely, erasing every trace of Diane's influence and creating new memories in every room. The kitchen where I'd received that first shocking text message was now where we hosted support group meetings for other fraud survivors. The living room where Diane had presented fake evidence was now where families came to learn about protecting themselves from similar schemes. One of our recent clients was a woman named Jennifer Martinez whose stepchildren had been systematically isolating her from her biological children while manipulating her husband's finances. The similarities to our case were chilling, but because she'd learned about the warning signs through our educational programs, she'd recognized the danger before suffering significant losses. "You saved my marriage and my family," she told us during her final consultation. "I might never have understood what was happening if you hadn't shared your story." The media attention surrounding our case had been both a blessing and a challenge. Several documentary filmmakers wanted to tell our story, and I'd written a book about recognizing and surviving family-based fraud that had become a bestseller. The visibility helped spread awareness about these crimes, but it also attracted attention from other criminal organizations who saw us as threats to their operations. Agent Martinez had warned us that Diane's network was larger than what had been prosecuted, and that other cells were still operating in different parts of the country. "You've become symbols of resistance to these criminals," she said. "That makes you valuable allies for law enforcement, but it also means you need to maintain security precautions." We'd installed comprehensive security systems, varied our routines, and maintained contact with law enforcement agencies that were tracking related criminal activities. The most meaningful recognition came from families whose lives had been saved by our advocacy work. We received letters, emails, and phone calls from people across the country who'd recognized warning signs in their own situations and taken action to protect themselves. An elderly man in Florida had avoided a marriage scam after reading our book. A woman in Texas had protected her inheritance from greedy relatives after attending one of our workshops. Each success story reminded us that our suffering had purpose and meaning beyond our own healing. As our first post-conviction Thanksgiving dinner wound down, Dad and I found ourselves alone in the kitchen, cleaning dishes and reflecting on everything that had brought us to this moment. "You know what I'm most grateful for," he said, drying a wine glass with careful attention. "I'm grateful that when they tried to turn me against you, love turned out to be stronger than manipulation. I'm grateful that when they tried to destroy our family, we became closer instead of farther apart." I hugged him tightly, still amazed that we'd both survived and thrived after coming so close to losing everything. "I'm grateful that we learned we're both stronger than we thought we were," I said. "And I'm grateful that we get to use our strength to help other families avoid what we went through." Looking back on the journey from that first shocking text message to this moment of peace and purpose, I realized that surviving systematic betrayal had taught me lessons I never could have learned any other way. I'd discovered reserves of strength, courage, and determination that I didn't know I possessed. I'd learned to trust my instincts even when everyone around me was telling me I was wrong. I'd learned that love and truth really are more powerful than lies and manipulation, but only if you're willing to fight for them. Most importantly, I'd learned that healing from trauma isn't about forgetting what happened or pretending it didn't matter. Healing comes from using your experience to create meaning, to help others, and to build relationships that are stronger than the ones that were destroyed. The criminals who'd tried to tear our family apart had unknowingly given us the opportunity to discover what we were truly capable of when we worked together against a common threat. As we finished cleaning up from dinner and prepared to join our friends in the living room for coffee and conversation, I felt a deep sense of contentment that had nothing to do with material success or external validation. We'd faced the worst that human predators could inflict on a family, and we'd not only survived but created something beautiful from the wreckage of our former lives. The house that had almost been stolen from me was now filled with laughter, friendship, and hope. The father who'd almost been lost to drugs and manipulation was now healthier and happier than he'd been in years. The family that had almost been destroyed by criminal conspiracy was now stronger and more loving than ever before. And the future that had once seemed so terrifying was now bright with possibilities for continued healing, growth, and service to others who needed our help. That night, as I sat in my home office responding to emails from families who were asking for help with their own situations, I thought about how different my life looked compared to a year ago. Instead of being an isolated victim fighting alone against sophisticated criminals, I was now part of a community of survivors and advocates working together to protect vulnerable families. Instead of being someone who had things done to her, I was someone who was actively making the world safer for others. The text message that had shattered my world with its casual cruelty, "Sweetie, I know I bought you this house, but don't come to Thanksgiving," had ultimately led me to discover my life's purpose and my true calling. The criminals who'd sent it had intended to begin my destruction, but instead they'd triggered a journey that led to healing, justice, and meaningful work that would continue for the rest of my life. Before I share how this story ends, I want to hear from you. Have you or someone you know ever experienced manipulation by family members or people you trusted? What warning signs do you think families should watch for? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button if this story helped you understand how sophisticated family-based crimes can be. Please subscribe to this channel so you don't miss other stories about survival, justice, and fighting back against people who try to destroy families. Share this video with anyone who might be dealing with suspicious family dynamics or elderly relatives who seem to be changing dramatically after new relationships. Your share could literally save someone's life by helping them recognize danger before it's too late. Thank you for taking this journey with me, and remember that no matter how powerful the people trying to hurt you might seem, truth and courage are always more powerful than lies and manipulation. Stay strong, trust your instincts, and never stop fighting for the people you love.